man.
45.
Last wish, please.
Last wish. I wish you had more time.
Hey.
Hello everyone, this is Pita Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have another video for you, and we're going to take a look back and reflect on the emotional violent drama thriller Man on Fire and why it remains such a classic many years after its overall release. And when we talk about the film's release, we go back to April the 23rd, 2004, where it stars Denzel Washington, Dakota Fanning, Christopher Walken, Rachel Ticotin, Radia Mitchell, Mark Antony and Mickey Rourke, and it was directed by Tony Scott. The movie itself is a loose adaptation of the 1980s novel created by A.J. Quinnell. The book actually had an earlier movie adaptation of the same name, which was released back in 1987 and starred Scott Glenn in the lead role. Now, the 2004 version follows the outline of the novel very closely, where we focus on the ex-CIA officer John Creasy, and he goes to New Mexico to visit his friend Paul Rayburn. Jaded from alcoholism and his past memories, Creasy is struggling to find direction in his life. Now, Rayburn offers Creasy a job as a bodyguard to protect a young girl named Pita. Creasy is hired on the cheap by her father Samuel Ramos due to the high kidnapping ransom rates within the city, and also the fact that he needs to maintain his kidnapping insurance policy. Whilst initially rejecting the attempts to interact from Pita, Creasy slowly starts to develop a strong bond and connection with her. He eventually reaches the point where he starts to believe that life is worth living once again. Now, things change dramatically when shortly after taking her to a piano lesson, Pita is taken hostage by the kidnappers. During the attempt to rescue her, Creasy kills 4 of the kidnappers, but is also shot multiple times and is taken to hospital to recover from his heavy wounds. Pita's parents strive to provide the 10 million ransom money in exchange for her life, but the exchange is ambushed by unknown assailants, and as a result, the leader of the kidnappers, known as The Voice, informs Pita's parents that he will claim her life. When told of Pita's apparent death in hospital, Creasy strives to find those responsible and wages a one-man war on the city in an ultimate quest for revenge. Now, when looking back on Man on Fire, it's a heavily intense violent movie, but it's almost a very emotionally compelling one. For all of the explosive action on display, this movie is driven much more by story and great characterization. Now, yes, in terms of narrative, it's a straightforward revenge story, but Man on Fire elevates that genre with a real sense of weight and self-reflection. It is essentially a film of two halves, the second being Creasy's unrelenting streak of violence and justice. But it really is the first half of the movie that makes Man on Fire the special film that it is. Now, this is when we focus on the bonds between Creasy and Pita, and many who will watch this film, particularly for the first time, may feel that this part of the film is very slow. But it's also the most important part of the film. By making us as an audience understand the relationship between Creasy and Pita, it justifies the violent extremes and actions carried out by Creasy later on. And we look at all of the earlier scenes between both Pita and Creasy, whether it's Pita constantly asking Creasy about his past. We have that moment where she hands him the Creasy bear that they refer to throughout the story as a present whilst they're having dinner. We have all of the montages where he trains her swimming, and then when she completes the race and they embrace together. And these moments, whilst very small, they are amongst the most impactful, and they're played just overly right. They're never overly cute or over sentimental. Pita as a character is very endearing, but she never gets annoying or too self-knowing. And you completely believe in a relationship between the two characters, and it's this section that is really the heart of the entire film. Now, there would have been so many other movies that would have rushed through this part of the story. They either would have opened with the kidnapping of Pita or told the relationship in quick flashback scenes, and it would have focused a lot more on all of the killing and violence. And if Man on Fire took this approach, it would have been far less impactful. It still would have been very intense, yes, but it just would have felt a bit more empty, playing much more into a generic revenge film that you generally see so much on streaming platforms. You really need this first section of the film, the relationship with Pita, the scenes where we see Creasy tortured by his past memories, threatening to kill himself. This is all important background that's necessary. If you cut all of this out, then the second half of the film is meaningless. But when we do come to the second half, as Creasy goes about exhibiting all of his justice, of course the dynamic and tone shifts and the pace ramps up more intensely. And yes, it is a sheer delight and indeed somewhat satisfying in watching Creasy dispatch and take out all of those responsible in a very violent and gruesome fashion. We get some standout moments and scenes, whether it's Creasy cutting off the fingers and ears of somebody whilst he's interrogating in the car. We see him blowing up cars with a bazooka, telling the bystanders that forgiveness is between people and God, that he just arranges the meeting. We have the quotable line from Ray spoken halfway through the film that death is Creasy's art and he's about to paint his masterpiece. We have the very hilarious moment where he shoves an explosive up someone's rectum before blowing him up and walking away nonchalantly. And all of these great scenes again are much more satisfying because of the first half of the story. And whilst this is the more action-packed part of the film, it also is where the movie is most flawed, and we have to raise the issue of Tony Scott's direction. Now in this movie, he elected to go for a hyperkinetic editing style. We get this truly unrelenting mix of quick cuts, shaky cam, black and white transitions, and subtitles appearing all over the screen. And to be honest, it can be to the movie's detriment. And in smaller doses, this type of editing would have been okay. But there are potential great action scenes that are reduced because of the chaotic style of editing. Now perhaps Scott was trying to make this movie much more active or exciting during the more character moments, but it ends up being too disorientating. Maybe Scott was trying to tap much more into the psyche of the characters, but I don't think here he was quite as successful as intended. Now whilst these sequences aren't enough to affect the overall watchability, Scott definitely would have been better off in reining in the editing just a little bit. But we then talk about the acting performances, and Scott has truly assembled a high quality cast here. Of course, the movie is completely driven by the two central performances of both Denzel Washington and Dakota Fanning. Again, this is most apparent in the first half of the film. Now as Creasy, Denzel is just great as usual. As a character, Creasy is that typical wounded gunman or hitman, that lone samurai looking for redemption and peace, and we've seen this narrative play out so many times throughout previous films. But Denzel just has this really relaxed, natural feel to his overall acting that makes you appeal to the character. We have these great scenes earlier on between him and a nun, which adds a certain empathy as he reflects on what he's done in the past and whether he can truly change. Very nice moments early on in the story. Equally as impressive is Fanning, who does very well in standing on equal par with an actor of such stature as Denzel Washington, and they play the character of Pita just right. She does challenge Creasy a lot, but she never tries to undermine him. They never make her too smart or too knowing. There still remains a vulnerability which you should have for a character within this story. I also love seeing Christopher Walken giving great support as Creasy's friend Ray, and it's so great to see him much more relaxed and charismatic, again one of cinema's truly great actors. And I also leave a mention for the musical score by Harry Gregson Williams, which brings a lot of those emotional tones and beats, especially in the first half of the movie. Again, you really feel the pain and struggle and torment within Creasy's character and also the bond with Pita, and especially towards the very heartbreaking climax, which I'm sure will evoke much more emotion and sadness regardless of where you are as an individual. So we then go on to the movie's overall release, and it was a moderate success at the box office, grossing over 130 million of a budget of around 60 to 70 million. And to be fair, Denzel's movies are not normally massive box office blockbusters. This is due because his films are much more adult and mature orientated. But more often than that, they tend to be profitable in the end due to the mainstream appeal of the actor. And Man on Fire still remains a great example of how you can elevate much more typical action material with great depth and emotion, bolstered by great dynamic and great performances. And this all makes it much more of a compelling film and story. Having enjoyed recent success with his Equalizer movies, as good as they are, I do think Denzel Washington's Man on Fire does what those films do just a little bit better. With a bit more power and a bit more of emotional characterization, Man on Fire still remains a great movie and very much, I would say, a classic many, many years after its overall release. So there's my overall thoughts and feelings and look back on Man on Fire. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you have any other movies or television series or any other topics within the pop entertainment and culture scene that you'd like to see me cover, then also let me know within the comments and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on those topics within the future. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves and I will see you very, very soon.